Speaking of the Chicago Bears, let's talk about them a little bit. That's the other team to cover today, and that is the weakest team in the NFC North. There's no question about it. They have our weakest projection. Surprisingly high defensive projection, I think. Some of that is just the expectation of regression because this is a team that's been good on defense for years. They were a top 10 defense in 2018, 2019, and 2020. Their mean wins is high because, as I've said on all these shows, our projections just came out more conservative than ever before this year with everything really closely packed around 500, but they only come out as the 26th best team. And their offense is just Darnell Mooney and the who are theys, is Byron Pringle anything without Patrick Mahomes? Velus Jones, as we were talking before the show, is already 25 years old, not really a prospect. Derrik, let's go to you first with your thoughts on the Chicago Bears.
It's just bleak, I think is probably the right word. The offensive projections, I think, are pretty spot on. I think the only room for optimism is that you just hope that Justin Fields really takes some insane step and that Luke Getsy is a really good quarterback teacher and offensive play caller. But you look at the personnel, this offensive line is it has to be a bottom 3 offensive line depth chart, just roster in the league. I mean, they brought in Lucas Patrick from Green Bay, which is nice, but they lost James Daniels and they're still they might be starting Larry Borum at tackle. It's just, they
Riley
have a
Reed
lot of
is now their left tackle. They just signed him.
Oh, well, I mean, I guess that does something if they're going to keep Tevin Jenkins at right tackle, which probably makes sense because that's what he played in college. And props to the new coaching staff and regime for realizing that. I don't know why the last one tried to move him to left, but yeah, I think the offense is just pretty doomed. And then for the defense, I kind of wrote this in the chapter. The projections feel a little rich to me because at least for me, I think the spots where they're bad, they're really bad. I think the interior defensive line is going to take a step back after losing Goldman and Hicks. And I know those guys weren't all that healthy last year, but I think they still have lost a lot of talent there. And then at linebacker, it's really, really hard to lose Alec Ogletree and then get worse at linebacker, but they found a way. And I think that's going to be a really big issue. So I think, again, even there, I think the only real reason for optimism is you just hope that Brisker and Kyler Gordon are huge upgrades, and they might be. I'm just not sure that's enough to move them into the
Yeah, you
range.
can't bet on that, certainly. You can't bet on rookies being great, even though, as I've talked before, our projection system, defensive rookies, the improvement from defensive rookies is a little bit more predictable than offensive rookies. So, you do better in our projections if you do have the defensive rookies, but great is quite a stretch, right?
I mean, doesn't this remind you, with the Bears, some of their position groups of an expansion team or something? It's
yes.
is this the 02 Texans or whatever? I mean, you look at the wide receiver group and N'Keal Harry is playing football for them. Equanimous St. Brown. This seems like you had to just pick up human beings who had played football before and that were better than USFL guys. And that's about the bar that they were able to meet. Now, what's interesting to me about the Bears, though, is just the timelines of every team in the NFC North. So that as long as Aaron Rodgers is around, one team is all in. The Vikings are calling themselves a competitive rebuild, which I think means we don't really believe we can win, but we kind of are trying to. And with the Bears, I think that what they did was mostly smart, but you have Justin Fields as sort of the elephant in the room because all these things of a tear down, resetting of the salary cap, all that stuff, that would be generally good for a franchise that had sort of just been drifting south anyway. And it kind of reminds me of where the Joe Burrow Cincinnati Bengals were in the first year. But of course, Burrow is fantastic and they drafted Jamar Chase and became a team that could go to the Super Bowl. But I think that this year might be sort of similar to what it looked like, where Burrow was trying to do everything and he was getting hit all the time and it just was kind of an ugly situation, but you could see it with Joe Burrow even when his team was horrific. And then they went into the offseason, spent all sorts of money, rebuilt their defense, and then drafted a superstar at the top. And I think if you're the Bears, that's your best case scenario, is that you can see it with Justin Fields, because there were times where you kind of could last year, but you really had to squint. I mean, it looked like somebody who didn't know where he was supposed to throw the football. And that's what I wonder too, is somebody like him, there's always this thing about always an athlete. We should do Warren Moon style and just have him throw all the time and have him do everything, or a Josh Allen, stand back there. You just do everything because you're a great athlete. But I think that he is more of a guy that needs like the bootlegs and the easy throws that are schemed up for him. Like there's more of a Tannehill-ness to him than maybe people would want to say. So I think that at least if you can see this is a system that works for him and he can hit the open receivers and he can do some of the basics and not just make the big time throws, then at least you'll feel like you can rebuild that thing. Even if you only won 5 games, you've got your quarterback. But for me, it's hard to see them winning more than 5 games when you look at this roster.
Yeah, I admit that the fact that the mean wins projection is so conservative this year, this is one of the teams where it really looks a little ridiculous. Like I'm not expecting the Bears to win more than 6, honestly. 7.7 seems a little absurd. The thing about Fields is, first of all, how much can you judge him based on the talent around him not being good? Like, will you know at the end of this year that he's the guy, or will you just be like, well, I guess we're going to have to see another year where he's got better talent around him? And you also don't want him picking up bad habits and frustrations from the fact that he's got a bad offensive line and bad receivers.
The offensive line thing, I think, is the biggest thing that Fields actually has to fix. Is just, I mean, I think he's always going to be a player who holds the ball. Like, usually if you're that way, you just are that way forever. Russ has always been that way. Deshaun Watson's always been that way. Ryan Tannehill has been that way forever. You just have to like find ways to consistently make good on it. And I think he kind of did at points last year. It's just, I think at a certain point, if the offensive line is so bad and you play that way, it's kind of impossible to make good on it unless you are someone who leaves the pocket a lot. You know, like Russ obviously left the pocket a lot. Mahomes will leave the pocket. Kyler Murray, that offensive line's not good, but he leaves the pocket a lot. Fields is not necessarily somebody who's like inclined to scramble unless he really, really has to. He's good at it. Like, he's obviously an incredible athlete. He just doesn't have the, like, it's not his first instinct to just bail and make a play. He wants to sit in the pocket and throw that deep post. Like, that's what he's looking for. And I just think like with the roster construction, that might not be possible. So I think you just kind of have to hope that you see a little bit more like creativity and just on the flyness from him this year.
Well, and how about this for an anti-analytical take? I think what you want to see is some toughness from him, some mental toughness, some physical toughness, because he is going to get whooped this year. His offensive line is still bad, right? And last year, there was a game, I think it was against Tampa Bay, where he looked so broken. Yeah, he looks so broke. And to me, like, this is a thing when, you know, covering football, I feel like I have a good sense or good eye for this kind of when guys are just feeling overwhelmed out there. And I've seen it from many Vikings offensive linemen, like the body language of someone who's just getting beaten. And, you know, if you can overcome that, and I never saw that with Joe Burrow when he played for Cincinnati. I mean, there were games where he was just getting crushed. He was getting back up, finding a way to throw a touchdown late in the game, like keeping his team in it. These kind of gritty things that you want to see from Justin Fields. I'm willing to say that last year he did show some of those. And the fact that he recovered from that Tampa game and had some better games down the stretch, that I wouldn't say that I know which way it's going to be, but this is just going to require a lot of toughness and a lot of grit and a lot of like mental strength, because the season is so long. And when you're bad, it just wears on you. And there's a reason why like Ryan Fitzpatrick stays in the league, because you cannot break Ryan Fitzpatrick, no matter how bad it's going for him. He'll keep coming at you. And that's what you really need to see, I think, from Fields to believe in it in the future. But if he has a terrible year and it looks like he's just lost and they have to bench him or something like that, I mean, you just have to draft another quarterback, and then you're behind with the rest of your roster building, and like then you get into sort of Jets territory. Like, I think that the Bears are kind of doing a dangerous dance here with the way that they fumbled this timeline regarding Justin Fields.
Nate Rogers asks, how much of an impact will Robinson's departure be on the Bears? I'm not sure that we think that Robinson's trying.
I don't think he was good last year. You don't know what's going on with the player, but it just felt like he had kind of checked out of being in Chicago. And it's hard to blame him. Like, it was bad there for a while. I think he probably felt that the head coach was gone if the season went poorly. The offense was not very well designed, and he was playing with a rookie quarterback, which, like, that's, even if a rookie quarterback is good, that's usually going to be harder than playing with a veteran that you're used to. So I don't think the Allen Robinson departure really means anything. Even if he's good in Los Angeles, he just wasn't good at the end of his Bears tenure. So I don't think losing him really does anything.
Brodelicia says, I think optimistic Bears fans are telling themselves Robinson, Mack, Hicks, and Goldman are big names, but it was a tough schedule and they won 6 games. So won't they win 6 games this year, I guess? I think there is a little bit of that in the projection because losing those guys is not a big change to the projection. Mack only played half a year. Our
They were
Goldman
hurt.
were not fully healthy. Robinson checked out. Like losing those guys is not a big change to our projections.